At Northside Gardens, an upscale suburban community known for its strict homeowners association, HOA, rules, the morning air buzzed with an unusual tension. Karen Mitchell, a longtime, no-nonsense member of the HOA board, was on a mission. Clad in a sharply pressed suit and armed with a clipboard, she strode through the perfectly trimmed lawns and pristine sidewalks with a single goal: to rid the neighborhood of any undesirable elements. Her eyes had fixed on one particular home, a modest, well-kept house with a neatly painted door and a small garden that looked just a little too wild for Karen's taste. The homeowner, Marcus Thompson, was a reserved, dignified black man known to few for his quiet resilience and kind nature. Rumors had circulated among some of Karen's friends that Marcus had not been following all the HOA rules. Karen, fueled by a mix of entitlement and prejudice, decided that Marcus must be evicted for failing to maintain his lawn and for other minor infractions that she believed threatened the community's standards. Without hesitation, Karen made a phone call to the HOA management. "I need to report a violation," she insisted in a clipped tone. "This man is ruining the look of our neighborhood. We must act now to protect our property values." Her voice was firm and unwavering, and as she spoke, a cold determination set in. Little did she know, the situation was far more complex than a simple violation of some outdated rule. Across the street, Marcus was calmly tending to his garden, unaware that his every move was about to be scrutinized by someone who believed he did not belong. Karen's words echoed in the background as the camera of fate began to roll. Here was a story of prejudice and power, of a man judged by his appearance, and a woman so convinced of her own authority that she would stop at nothing. What no one could have guessed was that this confrontation would soon reveal a twist that would upend Karen's world and shock the entire community. This was not just another day at Northside Gardens. It was the day when hidden truths would come to light, and the line between who truly belonged and who did not would be redrawn in the most unexpected way. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is about to turn everything on its head. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. For our returning subscribers, thank you so much for your unwavering support. It truly means a lot to our community. Northside Gardens was the kind of neighborhood where every lawn was meticulously cared for, and every home was maintained to perfection. The HOA prided itself on upholding a strict code of conduct, with rules covering everything from the color of house numbers to the proper way to trim hedges. In this environment, Karen Mitchell had built a reputation as a fierce enforcer of the community standards. Known for her sharp tongue and unyielding attitude, Karen saw herself as the guardian of Northside Gardens, willing to take drastic measures to keep the neighborhood pure. Karen had been a part of the HOA board for over a decade. Her opinions were well known, and she was not one to back down from a fight. To her, every deviation from the norm was a personal affront, a challenge to the order she worked so hard to maintain. This rigid mindset, however, came with a dark edge. Karen's views were colored by long-held prejudices, and she often judged others by the color of their skin or the simplicity of their lifestyle. In stark contrast was Marcus Thompson, the homeowner at the center of the controversy. Marcus was a man of quiet dignity and deep inner strength. He had purchased his home a few years earlier after working tirelessly to build a stable life for himself. Despite his humble beginnings, Marcus had managed to create a warm, welcoming space filled with personal touches that spoke to his journey. His garden, though not perfectly manicured, burst with life. Flowers in various hues, a small vegetable patch, and a few hand-painted signs that celebrated community and family. Marcus did not care for the rigid rules imposed by the HOA. He believed that a home was more than just a picture of perfection. It was a reflection of one's true self. Northside Gardens, with its mix of upscale residences and some modest homes like Marcus's, was a microcosm of a changing society. On one side, there were residents who clung to tradition and demanded conformity. On the other, there were those who valued authenticity and community spirit. The tension between these two worlds was often felt but rarely spoken about, until that fateful day when Karen's intolerance set events into motion. The airport-like hustle of the community center, where the HOA held meetings, was filled with diverse voices. Some residents supported Karen's strict enforcement of rules, believing it preserved their property values and the neighborhood's image. Others whispered about the need for change, arguing that a community should be defined by its heart, not by a set of rigid guidelines. Marcus, for his part, had always kept to himself, focusing on his work and his little garden. He had never asked for trouble, but now he found himself at the center of a battle that was far bigger than a dispute over lawn care. As the day unfolded, the stage was set for a confrontation that would force everyone in Northside Gardens to reconsider their definitions of ownership, belonging, and fairness. Karen, armed with her clipboard and a sense of moral superiority, had decided that Marcus was the problem. What she did not know was that the truth was more complicated and far more ironic than she could have ever imagined. Karen's call to the HOA management sparked immediate action. Within minutes, a notice was drafted demanding that Marcus remedy the alleged violations within a strict time frame. Karen personally oversaw the process, her eyes constantly scanning Marcus's property for any sign of imperfection. Every unruly weed, every untrimmed bush was noted and reported, fueling her belief that strict action was necessary to preserve the neighborhood's pristine image. Marcus, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the brewing storm. He had always maintained his home with care, even if it did not meet the exacting standards of Northside Gardens. When the eviction notice arrived, Marcus was surprised and dismayed. The document claimed that he had repeatedly failed to comply with the HOA rules, even though Marcus had always believed that his house, which he had worked hard to buy, was secure under his ownership rights. As the days passed, Karen's actions grew more aggressive. She attended every HOA meeting, waving the eviction notice like a badge of honor, and speaking out against what she called a threat to our community. Her rhetoric grew increasingly vitriolic, with neighbors beginning to wonder if her motives were purely about enforcing rules or if something darker was at play. Rumors began to circulate. Some said that Karen had a personal grudge against Marcus, while others whispered that she harbored prejudices that went beyond mere neighborhood standards. The tension mounted further when a group of residents, tired of the constant bickering, decided to confront Karen. At a heated community gathering, voices rose in protest against what many saw as an unjust attack on a longtime homeowner. Marcus's friends and supporters argued that a home was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where one's character mattered more than a perfect lawn. They reminded everyone that Northside Gardens was a community built on diversity and that enforcing outdated rules at the expense of decency was unacceptable. Amid the growing conflict, unexpected details began to emerge. Some residents discovered that Marcus had recently updated his property records, proving that he was the rightful owner of his home. These records also hinted at a twist that no one had anticipated. It turned out that years ago, during a time of financial hardship, Karen herself had made a questionable real estate investment that went sour. Unbeknownst to her, Marcus had quietly acquired a portion of property rights in the area, a fact that was buried deep in old documents and nearly forgotten. This revelation, though not yet widely known, would eventually prove to be a pivotal detail in the unfolding drama. The legal pressure intensified when Marcus's attorney was called in to dispute the eviction notice. In a formal letter sent to the HOA, his lawyer outlined Marcus's rights and presented evidence of his clean record. The letter was a clear, measured rebuke to Karen's aggressive tactics. It stated that not only was Marcus in full compliance with the law, but he also had legal documentation that contradicted the HOA's claims. This legal move only deepened the conflict, as Karen refused to back down, insisting that the rules must be enforced regardless of individual circumstances. In the midst of this simmering dispute, the community's sentiment began to shift. While some continued to support Karen's strict stance, many more started to see the situation for what it was, a clash of outdated prejudice against the simple truth of property, rights, and fairness. The conflict had grown from a mere matter of a poorly kept lawn into a battle over the values that define Northside Gardens. By the time the HOA board convened for an emergency meeting to address the controversy, the tension was palpable. Every resident in attendance sensed that the issue was no longer about minor infractions. It had become a symbol of a larger struggle between those clinging to old prejudices and those fighting for a community defined by fairness and respect. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, a moment when the truth would force everyone to question their assumptions and re-examine what it truly meant to belong. As the eviction proceedings escalated, the atmosphere in Northside Gardens grew increasingly charged with energy and uncertainty. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the community center, a building that had long been a gathering place for neighborhood events. This time, however, it was the epicenter of a conflict that threatened to upend the established order. Karen Mitchell, the driving force behind the eviction notice, stood at the podium. Her face was set in a mask of determination as she presented her case. With a series of pointed arguments, she laid out the alleged violations committed by Marcus Thompson, detailing every minor infraction with an intensity that left little room for rebuttal. Her tone was harsh, and her language was direct. Every word was chosen to emphasize the need for strict adherence to the rules that, in her eyes, protected the community's integrity. Yet, as she spoke, murmurs of dissent began to rise among the attendees. A few residents, having reviewed their own copies of the community bylaws, questioned whether Karen's interpretation of the rules was as black and white as she claimed. The atmosphere in the room shifted from one of support for the status quo to a growing sense of unrest. People began to ask, in quiet but determined voices, if enforcing these arbitrary standards was worth the cost of dividing the community. During the meeting, Marcus's attorney presented counter-evidence that challenged Karen's case. Photocopies of updated property records, maintenance receipts, and even testimonials from neighbors attested to Marcus's commitment to his home. One document in particular revealed a startling fact. A portion of the property ownership records, archived long ago, indicated that Marcus held rights that extended far beyond what was publicly known. These records, initially dismissed as old and irrelevant, now hinted at an irony that no one could have foreseen. Karen Mitchell, in her past dealings, had inadvertently lost a stake in local properties that, according to the records, now belonged to Marcus. As the board deliberated, heated debates ensued. Some members staunchly defended Karen's actions, arguing that the rules were in place for a reason and that exceptions could not be tolerated. Others, however, began to see the injustice of the situation. A home is not just about a well-kept lawn, one board member argued passionately. It is about the heart and soul of the community. We must not let prejudice dictate our actions. These words resonated with a growing number of residents, and soon the meeting turned into a forum of impassioned speeches and demands for accountability. Outside the community center, where the unfolding drama spread quickly. Social media buzzed with hashtags such as #JusticeForMarcus and #HOA Reform, and local news stations began covering the story. Videos of the heated meeting were shared widely, drawing attention not only from Northside Gardens but from the broader public. The pressure on the HOA board to address the situation became overwhelming, and calls for an independent review of Karen's conduct were made by influential community leaders and civil rights advocates. As the internal debate raged on, Karen herself found her position increasingly isolated. While she had been the vocal advocate for strict adherence to the rules, the evidence and public sentiment now pointed to a different narrative, one of arbitrary standards and hidden errors in the records that she had long taken for granted. The mounting tension within the board was mirrored by the growing outrage in the community. Residents who had once quietly accepted the status quo now demanded transparency and fairness. Amidst this escalating conflict, the truth about the property records could no longer be ignored. A local historian, known for his meticulous research into the neighborhood's archives, presented new evidence during the meeting. He explained that years ago, due to a series of unfortunate financial decisions, Karen had lost a significant portion of her investment in local real estate. Unbeknownst to her, Marcus Thompson had acquired those rights, which over time had grown in value. The revelation was a shock to everyone present. It turned the entire eviction case on its head, as it implied that not only was Marcus in full legal possession of his home, but he also held a stake in properties that Karen once owned. The community erupted in reaction. The revelation was seen as a dramatic twist, a moment when the scales of justice were finally tipping. What had begun as a petty dispute over a poorly maintained lawn had now transformed into a battle over ownership, pride, and long-buried mistakes. The tension reached its zenith as the board realized that they were faced not with a simple violation of rules, but with a case that questioned the very integrity of the HOA's enforcement practices. The crowd outside grew restless, and passionate voices demanded that the board act immediately. The once unyielding stance of Karen began to crumble under the weight of undeniable evidence and public pressure. The meeting became a turning point where long-held prejudices and bureaucratic errors collided, setting the stage for a dramatic resolution. The energy in the room was electric, and every attendee could feel that this was a moment that would redefine what it meant to be part of Northside Gardens. The decisive moment arrived during a follow-up board meeting held in an emergency session. The room was packed with residents, board members, and local journalists eager to witness the final outcome. At the head of the table, Karen Mitchell sat with a look of defiance mixed with unease. The local historian had just presented the damning property records that confirmed Marcus Thompson's rightful ownership and, more shockingly, revealed that he held a stake in properties that Karen had once controlled. As the evidence was laid out, a hush fell over the room. One by one, board members and community leaders voiced their disbelief. This means that the very home we are trying to evict is not only legally owned by Marcus, but it also represents a part of Karen's own lost legacy, one elderly resident said, his voice trembling with emotion. The weight of the truth was now undeniable. In that charge moment, Marcus Thompson was called to the front to speak. With quiet dignity, he addressed the gathered crowd. I have worked hard to build a home that reflects my values. I do not wish to live in fear or be judged by unfair standards. I stand here as a rightful owner and as someone who believes in fairness and community. His words resonated deeply, and the audience listened in rapt silence. Karen, who had been so sure of her authority and moral superiority, now found herself exposed. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and the reality that she had once lost her own stake in the neighborhood was a bitter pill to swallow. As the board deliberated, the tension in the room reached a fever pitch. Finally, the presiding officer, a respected elder on the board known for his fairness, declared, "Based on the evidence presented, the eviction notice against Mr. Thompson is hereby nullified. Moreover, we will be launching a full review of our practices and hold accountable those who have misused their authority." A wave of relief and vindication swept through the room. The turning point was complete. The very system that had once been used to enforce prejudice was now forced to reckon with its own mistakes. Karen Mitchell, her face pale and eyes downcast, could no longer defend her actions. The community's roar of support for Marcus echoed throughout the hall, and the atmosphere was charged with the promise of reform. In that climactic moment, the power dynamic shifted irrevocably. What began as an attempt to evict a homeowner was revealed to be a miscarriage of justice driven by personal bias and outdated rules. Marcus Thompson emerged as a symbol of resilience and fairness, and the truth of his ownership, and by extension, the community's right to embrace diversity, was now an undeniable fact. The shock of the revelation rippled through every corner of Northside Gardens, setting the stage for long overdue changes. In the aftermath of the dramatic board meeting, Northside Gardens entered a period of reflection and transformation. The nullification of the eviction notice was met with widespread relief and celebration throughout the community. News of the incident spread quickly, and local media hailed the decision as a victory for fairness and accountability. The once contentious issue had sparked a broader conversation about the need for reform in the HOA's practices and in how communities should treat one another. Marcus Thompson continued his daily routine, now bolstered by the knowledge that he was not only the rightful owner of his home, but also a symbol of a new, more inclusive future for the neighborhood. He received messages of support from civil rights groups, local leaders, and many of his neighbors who had long felt that the strict enforcement of outdated rules had stifled the community's true spirit. Marcus's quiet determination and dignity in the face of injustice became an inspiration for many. Karen Mitchell, on the other hand, was forced to confront the reality of her actions. The revelation that she had once lost a stake in the very properties she sought to protect was a humbling lesson. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board instituted a series of reforms designed to ensure that no resident would ever again be judged by superficial standards or personal bias. Training sessions on cultural sensitivity and transparency were introduced, and an independent review committee was established to oversee future disputes. At a community town hall held in the newly revamped clubhouse of Northside Gardens, the board members and residents gathered to discuss the changes ahead. One board member stated, "Today we have learned that true community is built on fairness and respect. We must look past old grudges and work together to create an environment where every person is valued." His words were met with nods and applause, and the atmosphere was filled with a renewed sense of hope. In the final hours of that day, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm glow over the neighborhood, Marcus Thompson walked through his garden with a quiet smile. The once contentious dispute had given way to a broader movement for reform and unity. Neighbors exchanged friendly greetings, and the air was alive with the promise of a brighter, more inclusive future. The story of the attempted eviction and its shocking twist became a turning point for Northside Gardens, a reminder that prejudice and outdated authority could be overcome by truth and accountability. The experience left an indelible mark on everyone involved and served as a catalyst for lasting change within the community. As the meeting drew to a close, the community leader thanked everyone for their participation and reaffirmed the commitment to upholding justice and fairness. "Let this be a lesson to us all," he declared. "A community is strongest when we stand together, respect one another, and embrace the truth, no matter how difficult it may be." Northside Gardens emerged from that day more united than ever. The painful lessons of the past were acknowledged, and steps were taken to ensure that every resident, regardless of background, would be treated with dignity. In the end, what started as an act of prejudice turned into a powerful movement for equality, leaving the entire community changed for the better.